"Did anyone say anything?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me as I dropped my gym bag by the door. I was still feeling the pleasant burn in my muscles, the confidence that came from a good workout. I genuinely thought he was asking because he liked the new sportswear he'd bought me. "About what? The new gear?" I asked, smiling. "No, but it's great. This sports bra is amazing." His face fell. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but a subtle, chilling collapse of his features. The smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine disappointment. It was so out of place that a knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. That's when he told me. He explained with a tone of someone revealing a clever punchline what the logo meant. He pointed to the bold white letters across my chest. "Blacked," he said, his smirk returning. "It's a porn company." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, waiting for my reaction. He detailed the specific genre, the one he knew would cut the deepest. The joke was that he, the man who threw a fit when he learned I had dated black men before him, had sent me out as a walking billboard for his deepest insecurity. He wanted strangers to look at me with contempt. He wanted me to be publicly humiliated, to come home in tears so he could comfort the very wound he had inflicted. His disappointment wasn't that the joke was cruel. It was that his plan had failed. My name is Hannah, and for 10 years, I was the project manager of a failing marriage. By day, my life was organized in spreadsheets and timelines. I was the person who made things run smoothly, who identified problems and implemented solutions with calm efficiency. At home, I applied the same logic, trying to manage the slow, creeping rot that had taken root in our life together. I believed in fixing things, not throwing them away. I thought that with enough patience and meticulous care, I could restore what we once had. For years, I endured his campaign of jokes. Each one was a small cut, easily dismissed on its own. I remember being at a dinner party with his friends, feeling proud of a dish I'd made. He raised his glass for a toast and said, "To my wife, who still looks pretty good despite the saggy tits." The table erupted in uncomfortable laughter. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my smile freezing on my face. I had to pretend it was funny, to play along with my own degradation, because causing a scene would have been worse. Then there were the nightly interrogations, disguised as casual conversation. "Who did you have lunch with today? What did you talk about? Did you go straight to the store after work?" It was a constant audit of my life, a subtle reminder that my time was not my own. He tried to isolate me, chipping away at the things that brought me joy. My gym was my sanctuary, the one place where I felt strong and in control of my own body. He started complaining about it, insisting I join his, where he could keep an eye on me. Each incident was a tiny paper cut. Alone, they were nothing, but together they were bleeding me dry. I kept telling myself it was just his immaturity, a twisted way of showing he cared. I told myself he would grow out of it. That was my fatal flaw, my trust. I desperately wanted to believe he was still the charming, funny man I fell for, not the cruel, insecure man he was becoming. He saw that hope, that willingness to find the good in him, and he exploited it to no end. Standing there in my living room, the sweat from my workout turning cold against my skin, I finally saw the truth. This wasn't a prank. This was a calculated act of psychological warfare, designed to shame me and reinforce his control. He genuinely believed I was so emotionally dependent on him that I had no breaking point. His supreme arrogance made him completely blind to the fact that his actions were having a permanent, hardening effect on my heart. For a long time, I had been sanding down my own edges to make us fit together. I had accepted his excuses, managed his insecurities, and absorbed his casual cruelty, all in the name of building a life. But in that moment, something inside me clicked into place. The project manager took over. I looked at the problem, at the years of data I had collected, and I finally understood. The project was a failure. The foundation was rotten. It was no longer a restoration job. It was a demolition. He thought he had finally broken me. He had no idea he had just handed me the blueprint for his own destruction. He thought he had finally broken me. He had no idea he had just handed me the blueprint for his own destruction. There was no screaming match. There were no tears. My emotional response, the one he craved, simply never arrived. Instead, a profound, chilling clarity settled over me. It was like a faulty variable in a complex equation had finally been identified. His cruelty wasn't a bug in his system, it was a core feature. It was who he was. He saw the look on my face, the absence of the hurt he expected, and his arrogance faltered. It was replaced by a whiny, pathetic defensiveness. "What? It was just a joke, babe," he said, his voice pleading. "Come on, you know I'm just kidding. Can't you take a joke?" I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see the man I married. I didn't see the ghost of the person I once loved. I saw a small, insecure bully who needed to make his wife feel worthless to feel like a man. The love wasn't just gone. It felt like it had never been real. The next morning, the sun streamed through the blinds as I got ready for my run. My usual routine felt different, charged with a new purpose. I opened my drawer, and my eyes landed on the sportswear he had given me. The bold, white letters stared back at me. Without a moment of hesitation, I picked up that same sports bra. I deliberately pulled it on, the fabric cool against my skin. It wasn't an act of spite or a passive-aggressive jab. It was a declaration. I was done being his punchline. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The logo was no longer a mark of his intended shame. It was a symbol of my decision, a uniform for the new project I was about to undertake. By wearing his weapon of humiliation, I was taking back my power. I was in on the joke now, and he was about to find out it wasn't funny anymore. He was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in, stretching my arms over my head. He saw the bra and stopped mid-pour, the coffee pot hovering over his mug. His face cycled through a series of emotions, confusion, then irritation, and finally, a flicker of rage. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice low and tight. "Take that off, it's not funny." "You're right," I said calmly, meeting his gaze without blinking. "It's not." I turned and walked out the front door, the click of the lock echoing behind me. My run that morning was the best I'd had in years. Every stride felt lighter, every breath of crisp air felt cleaner. When I got back, he was waiting for me on the porch, his arms crossed, a storm brewing in his eyes. He didn't wait for me to get inside. He lunged forward, grabbing the front of the bra, his fingers digging into my skin. He ripped it off me right there on the street, the fabric tearing with a sickening sound. He didn't say a word. He just marched to the public trash can at the end of our driveway and shoved the ruined bra deep inside. It was another performance, another act of control designed to show me who was in charge. But as I watched him, all I felt was a cold, hard certainty. I needed an exit strategy, not another argument. My professional life is about creating and executing plans, about foreseeing obstacles and preparing for them. The project of my marriage was officially being terminated, and I was now managing the dissolution. I went for a long walk. Anyone watching would have thought I was cooling off after a fight, but I wasn't. I was working. I was project managing my escape, my mind a flurry of timelines and resource allocation. I took out my phone and opened a new note. The screen glowed in the afternoon light as I typed out a simple, numbered list. It was a project charter for the rest of my life. Number 1, call my brother. I didn't need to vent or cry. I needed logistics. I explained the situation in the same calm, factual tone I would use in a status meeting. I laid out the problem, the final escalation, and my decision. He listened without interruption. When I was done, he just said, "Okay, what do you need?" That was my brother. Practical, loyal, and ready to act. Number 2, leverage his network to find immediate housing. This was my hidden ace. I knew his best friend owned a small property that he rented out, and I remembered him saying it was currently empty between tenants. My brother confirmed it within minutes. It was mine for as long as I needed. Number 3, pack one bag with essentials. When I got back to the house, he was gone, probably off with his friends, complaining about his crazy, emotional wife. The silence was a gift. I moved with quiet efficiency, pulling a duffel bag from the closet. I packed my work laptop, chargers, important documents, a few changes of clothes, and my running shoes. I left behind the photo albums, the gifts he'd given me, the entire shared history we had built. It was all just dead weight now, assets of a failed project ready for liquidation. Number 4, inform the landlord of my departure in writing. I sat at my laptop and composed a short, professional email. I stated that I would be vacating the premises and that my husband would be solely responsible for the remainder of the lease. It was a clean, legal cut. Number 5, confront him and leave. This was the final implementation phase. He came home a few hours later, his mood artificially cheerful. He had probably decided to be the bigger person, to forgive me for my supposed overreaction. He found me in the living room, standing by the door with my duffel bag at my feet. His smile faltered. "Going somewhere?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light, but the insecurity was already creeping in. "Yes," I said, my voice even and steady. "I'm leaving you." His supreme arrogance, his greatest vulnerability, flared to life. He actually laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous, Hannah. You're just upset. We'll talk about it tomorrow." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, picking up my bag. "I've already made arrangements. I'm leaving now." My husband's fatal flaw was his genuine belief that I was trapped, that I had nowhere to go and no will to act. He couldn't conceive of a world where I would actually leave him. He thought my life revolved entirely around him, and in his mind, that made me powerless. I was about to use my meticulous planning skills to exploit that assumption and dismantle my life with him in a matter of hours. The look of dawning horror on his face as he realized I was serious, that my bag was packed and my plan was already in motion, was the first real consequence he had ever faced for his actions. The look of dawning horror on his face as he realized I was serious, that my bag was packed and my plan was already in motion, was the first real consequence he had ever faced for his actions. But it lasted only for a moment. His system rebooted, falling back on its default programming, arrogance and disbelief. He took a step forward, trying to close the space between us, to re-establish the familiar dynamic of our home. "Hannah, stop this. You're being dramatic. We had a fight. Couples fight. You don't just pack a bag and leave." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, my hand resting on the handle of my duffel bag, feeling the solid weight of it. It was the only thing in the room that felt real. "I am not being dramatic," I said, my voice as level as a freshly paved road. "I am being decisive. I want a divorce." The smirk that spread across his face was instantaneous and infuriating. It was his go-to weapon, the one he used to dismiss my feelings and end any argument he was losing. "What? Over a bra?" he scoffed, perfectly on script. "You're going to throw away 10 years of marriage over a stupid piece of clothing." That was his cue, the opening I had prepared for. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the anger I felt show. Instead, I began my report, delivering the findings of a decade-long project analysis. "It was never about the bra," I began, my tone calm and factual. "It was about you calling me saggy tits in front of your friends and expecting me to laugh along with my own humiliation." His smirk wavered, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I continued without pausing, my rhythm steady and controlled. "It was about you interrogating me every single night about who I spoke to and where I went, as if I were a child who needed to account for her time. It was about you trying to convince me to quit my gym, a place that made me feel strong, because you couldn't stand the thought of me having a space that was just mine." I took a small breath, keeping my gaze locked on his. "And yes, it was about you deliberately buying me a piece of clothing with a porn logo on it. It was about you sending me out in public, hoping that strangers would look at me with disgust, just so you could feel powerful for 5 minutes." With each point I listed, his smugness cracked and fell away. It was replaced by a pathetic defensiveness, the look of a cornered animal that had run out of tricks. He started shaking his head, his hands held up as if to ward off my words. "That's not fair," he stammered. "Those were jokes. I was just kidding around. If it was so bad, why didn't you say something sooner? Why didn't you leave me then? He kept repeating it, the question becoming a desperate, whining refrain. Well, why didn't you leave me then, Hannah? If you were so unhappy, why did you stay? It was the only defense he had left, to make my departure a failure of my own character. He couldn't grasp that then had finally, irrevocably become now. The takedown wasn't in shouting or crying. It was in my absolute calm. It was in the quiet finality of my decision, a decision he was completely powerless to change. I had spent years trying to fix our marriage, but my final project was dismantling it, and I was executing the plan flawlessly. I didn't bother to answer his question. It didn't matter anymore. I simply bent down, picked up my pre-packed bag, and walked to the door. I left him standing alone in the middle of the living room, his mouth slightly open, utterly bewildered. He looked like a man who had just watched a magic trick he couldn't possibly understand. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the sound was like a starting pistol. My phone, which had been silent in my pocket, began buzzing. It didn't stop. A frantic series of texts lit up the screen, one after another, a digital record of his entire personality unraveling. First, there was the disbelief. This is a joke, right? You're going to walk around the block and come back, open the door. Then the anger. You can't do this to me. After everything I've done for you, you ungrateful bitch. Get back here right now. Finally, the pathetic pleas mixed with jealous accusations. Babe, I'm sorry. Please come back. I love you. We can fix this. Who are you with? Are you going to see someone? That's what this is about, isn't it? Through it all, as I walked down the quiet suburban street toward the rest of my life, I felt nothing but a profound sense of relief. It was a physical sensation, like a heavy, lead-lined coat being lifted from my shoulders. I watched his name flash on my screen as he tried to call. For the first time in years, it didn't cause a knot of anxiety to tighten in my stomach. It was just a name, a notification from a project that was now closed. He had lost his primary source of control, and his panic was palpable even through the glass of my phone. He was alone in an apartment he couldn't afford on his own, his power to hurt me completely and utterly gone. I reached into my pocket, pressed the button on the side of my phone, and silenced the frantic buzzing. I didn't block him. Not yet. Silencing him felt more final. It was my choice not to listen. I kept walking toward my new, quiet life, leaving him to scream into the void. I kept walking toward my new, quiet life, leaving him to scream into the void. And the void, I discovered, was vast and wonderfully silent. The frantic calls and texts continued for a few days, a desperate flurry of digital noise, before sputtering out into nothing. 6 months later, that silence has been the most satisfying revenge I could have ever imagined. It wasn't something I planned or orchestrated. It was simply the natural consequence of his actions, the final, inevitable outcome of a project he had mismanaged from the very beginning. I kept the small, quiet property my brother's friend let me use. It was a simple, one-bedroom apartment over a detached garage, but it was more of a home than the house we shared ever was. I turned it into a sanctuary that is entirely and completely mine. There are no spreadsheets here managing someone else's moods. There are plants in the windows, catching the morning sun. The books on my shelves are the ones I want to read, not the ones he thought made us look smart. The air is clean, free of the tension that used to hang like a thick fog. Last night, I was on a video call with my friend, Sarah. We were deep into planning a trip to Amsterdam, something I had wanted to do for years but had always put off. He had always found a reason it was a bad idea. Too expensive, too far, not the right time. The real reason, I now understood, was that he couldn't stand the thought of me experiencing joy without him. We were laughing so hard I had to wipe tears from my eyes as we argued about which museums to visit first. In that moment, surrounded by maps and travel guides in my own peaceful space, I realized I hadn't laughed like that in a decade. It was a pure, uncomplicated happiness that belonged only to me. My ex, on the other hand, completely imploded. Sarah was the one who told me, her voice hesitant at first, as if she were delivering bad news. She didn't realize she was handing me the final report on a successfully completed project. He couldn't afford the rent on his own. It turned out that my steady, reliable income was the primary pillar holding up the life he took for granted. After 2 months of missed payments, he was evicted. The landlord had to change the locks. He had to move back in with his parents. The man who prided himself on being the king of his castle, the master of his domain, was now sleeping in his childhood bedroom at the age of 35. His life had been reset to zero. The most telling part was what happened to his social life. Sarah told me about a get-together a few weeks ago. He was there, trying to hold court, attempting to be the same charming, funny guy he always pretended to be. He tried one of his classic jokes, a belittling comment about a woman at the party and what she was wearing. But this time, there was no one to be the target. There was no wife to absorb the cruelty and force a polite, pained smile to signal to everyone else that it was all in good fun. The room just went silent. Without me as his shield and his punchline, people finally saw the humor for what it was, pathetic and mean. His jokes don't land anymore. He just sounds bitter, a man whose only skill was punching down at a person who was no longer there. I felt a strange sense of detachment hearing all of this. It wasn't joy or triumph. It was the quiet satisfaction of a project manager seeing a complex system behave exactly as predicted. His entire identity was built on his control over me. When I removed myself from the equation, his whole world collapsed. My revenge wasn't a fiery explosion or a dramatic confrontation. It was the simple, irreversible act of walking out the door. It was the silence on my end of the phone. It was me, laughing about a trip to Amsterdam, not even thinking about him. He is left with nothing but the echo of his own cruelty, trapped in a house full of his old trophies, a living monument to a life he failed to build. And I am finally, peacefully free.